Hello and welcome everyone to the third episode in the Parahack Let's Learn Sveltekit series. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can load data into our Sveltekit application. Remember in the last episode, I told you that we had a bunch of special files in Sveltekit. The one we've touched on the layout and the page file. Well, we also have another special file called the server files. And how do we create a server file? Plus page.server .js. Now this is a special kind of file. You can just use it for anything. You can just decide to create this file so you can keep keep anything you want to keep inside. This is a special file that you create when you want to do some specific things. There are two major things you can do on this type of file, but we're going to be looking at one, which is loading data. Now what I want you guys to do as we continue is to go to your extension styles on Visual Studio Code and download the Svelte for VS Code extension. It's a really nice extension that gives us a lot of cool stuff, and I'll be using a lot of the cool stuff it gives us from now on, so that in order for you to be able to follow accordingly, download that extension, but it's not a must. Now, how do we actually load data? We create this file, first step done. What next? Next thing we're going to do is have to create a load function. Now I can actually write out the load function, but I can just use this it's given to us by the Sveltekit for VS Code extension. I can write kit load, click on it, and we have this load function generated for us. Now this is just a function called load exported out of this file. It needs to be this. Now it could be in any format you want, but it must be a function called load exported out of this file. Now in here we can basically do data fetching. So we can fetch data and we can send it to the page, the corresponding page. So the corresponding page for this server file will be this plus page.svelte file right here. So I can actually just fetch data as I would do in every other JavaScript code. Now I'm using dummy JSON to get users, a bunch of users, and I'm using the fetch API, very simple. So what I'm doing is just fetching from this endpoint, converting it to JSON, and I'm logging it out, but I don't actually need to log it out. So we're going to send it to the page so we can view it. So this would run on the server. That's just one thing I think I might have forgotten to tell you. This would always run on the server. It's called a server load function. It will run on the server always, at all times. So on initial load, it's run on the server. On subsequent navigation, it's run on the server as well. So how do we actually get it to the page? We're just going to have to return it. Now we've gotten it on rest right here. I can return users with an S, and I'll just rename this to users because that makes more sense since we are fetching the users. And now I have the users returned, and this plus page the svelte file, since that is the corresponding page for this server file, we can get that data right here. I'll open the script. Let's open curly braces data is equals to $props. This is how we get it right here. And now I can log out this data. Data dot users, because that's what I want. And you will notice that this actually knows what you are expecting. So you did data.user, it auto completes for you because of Svelte has all those types built in. Svelte just gives you the best experience when it comes to working with web applications. So let's check this in our browser. It's actually showing there in the console, but it's not proper. So let's check this in the browser. As you can see, we have this right here. Okay, a lot of the stuff I don't actually understand what is here. But if I go down here to the users right here, you see that we have this array of 30 users, and we are getting the address and blah blah blah. But we are basically fetching the data. We are getting data and we are fetching it right here. So we can actually render out the data. I can just look through that, iterate through the users, data dot users as user, and I will get the user dot first name and also the last name as well. So user dot last name. Save this. This isn't actually showing, and that's because of what is being returned is users, but we also have to get users again. So one way we can just fix this is just to structure this out like so. Save this, get rid of this console, we don't need it, and this should work now. The issue was just with the way it was being returned. There's no issue now. If I go to the browser, you see that all of the names are being rendered. We have all of them, Emily Johnson, Michael Williams, Sophia Brown, so on and so forth. And that is one way of fetching data in Sveltekit. And yes, you heard me correctly. One way of fetching data. We have another way of fetching data, but we'll get to that in a second. What I want us to focus with now is how do we actually fetch data with dynamic routes. Again, if you were there for the last episode in routing, if you were not, make sure you go back and watch that video. But if you were there, you remember that we did this blog routes where I showed you how you can get dynamic routes and route parameters and all that stuff. So how can we actually get that stuff in data fetching and actually use that parameter to fetch certain data? What I'm going to do now is make this div an a tag, give this an href that goes to a particular route, and that route is going to be, let's call it slash user slash curly braces users dot id. Now when we click on any of the user, we would go to a dynamic page. The styles have changed because of I'm using an a tag now. So I'm just going to fix that a little bit. I'll put it inside a div so it acts as a block. I did a quick fix without any CSS. So that should fix it. Yeah. Now if we click on Emily Johnson, it will take us to user slash 1. If I click on Michael Williams, it will take us to user slash 2. And we can create a dynamic route right here. Open our square brackets and say user ID. And in here we can have a page that's spelt. This is the user page. But this user ID needs to be inside a user folder. User, and I'll put this user ID in the user folder. Now that's correct. If I go back to the browser, if I click on any of this link, so it takes us to this is the user page. But I want to get data concerning Emily Johnson in particular. If I go back to dummy JSON, right here, you'll see that we have a way to get a single user with this. But we need to be able to get the route parameter that we are setting in the dynamic route. So for the user and inside the user ID, this is where I want to fetch the single user's data. So I'll create my plus page.server.js file. In here, I'll create a load function. And I don't need all of this extra stuff. Right here, I will just paste that. Nope, not this. Let's make sure we copy that correctly. Wish there was like a copy button. So paste this. I'll say const user is equals to await this. Now this would always give us the user with the ID of 1, but I want the user that was clicked on. How I can get the ID, the user ID, which is what is going to be the parameter. By going to the load function directly here, the structuring, so curly brace is the structure, and in here I can get the params. Now usually this should be giving me auto completion. I am not sure whether it's because I'm using JavaScript. I usually don't use JavaScript because I'm working with Sveltekit. It's just because of this tutorial I don't want to use TypeScript. But it could also be an issue with my editor. Sometimes it just does this. But what I'm trying to just point out is that Sveltekit gives you great experience. And one of the great experience it gives you is by giving you all these auto completions just built into the framework. So if I usually just click Control Spacebar, this will give me all of the accepted properties right here, and params is one of them. So it should probably be acting like that for you, but for some reason it's not acting that way for me. But from params, I can destructure the user ID, so I can come and say const user ID, and user ID should also autocomplete. Really annoying that it's not actually working that way for me right now. To get the user ID right here, and for the user ID, I can also put it directly right here. So I can now opening your curly braces is not enough because this is not a svelte file. This is a JavaScript file. We need to change this to backticks first of all, and we also have to put a dollar sign in front of this. Save that, and I'll log out the user, the single user. I'll get rid of this, then console log out like using then right here, and let's check this out in our browser. Now we have this is home, and we have all the names. If I clicked on this random name, Jackson Evans, it takes us to this page, right? But if we open our editor, you see that we actually get the information of Jackson Evans right here. We have his first name, we have his last name, maiden name, and age. So let's actually render out his first name, his last name, his email, and his phone number. I think that's enough. So let's go to the plus page, that's fill file. Again, if you remember how we actually got the data, it's through a prop runs, the props run right here. But this time it's gonna be props, and here's gonna be data. Now it's doing the autocomplete for me. It did it right there. I have a p tag, and the first p tag is gonna be data dot user dot first name, and then we'll have the data dot user dot last name, but we'll have the last name in a different p tag, and we also have one for the email as well. Okay, let's do the phone number. The phone number as well. You can get ample information about this user. I've even forgotten what we used for. Was it phone number? Phone. All right. Now let's check our browser, and we are seeing can't read this, and probably the reason is that this is nested as well. So let's check this. It doesn't look nested. So why isn't it getting? Right, so the error I'm getting is cannot read property of undefined, telling me that the first name is undefined. And the reason why it's actually giving me that error, if you were not able to catch up with it, like me, is because of we are not returning the user. We are fetching it, but we are not returning it. Very important that we return it. Return, open our brackets, user. Now right here, we should be able to get this user's information like this. As you can see, we have Papa Kelly, the email, and the number. Go back, refresh this. I can get for any user right here. I can go for James Davis. Click here, we get the information of James Davis. And that's how we can fetch data for dynamic routes using browse parameters. Now remember I said something about another way of fetching data in Sveltekit. Well, that is the plus page.js file. So let me rename this plus page.server.js file to just a plus page.js file, and they work basically at the simplest form the same way. So I click enter. Now this is a plus page.js. Now remember, this is no more a server file, this is just plus page.js. It's a special file, but it's not a server file. Go back to my browser, and this still works the same way. I go back, I click on random name, it still gives me the data. Click on another random name, it gives me the data. So I know you might be thinking that since they work the same way, what are the difference? Well, the plus page.js file, the load function in that file is called a universal load function, while the load function in the plus page.server.js file is called a server load function. And the reason why the one in the um, plus page.js is called universal load function because of it runs both on the server and on the client. The way it works is that on initial load, it runs on the server, but on subsequent navigation, like when you navigate to and fro to that page that uses a plus page.js load function, universal load function, is done on the browser. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to make this as clear as I possibly can. So once you land on the page for the first time or on initial load like this, run this, bam, it's run on the server. It's not done on the client. But if I navigate to this page and back to this page, getting this data again for the second time is done on the client, it's done on the browser. So it's not always going to have a connection to the server. It only has a connection to the server on initial load. I want you to get that. But when it comes to the server load function, like in the name, it runs on the server always. So the plus page.server.js file, the load function in that file would always run on the server, whether on initial load or on subsequent navigations, it would always run on the server. Now, this is a pretty minor difference, and this can actually make you confused on what to use and when to use what. Like, okay, I want to fetch data from this API, I want to fetch data directly from my backend. What should I use? They seem pretty similar. It's just like a name difference. Well, there's actually a good reason why you might want to use one over the other. So, for example, in this our scenario where we are actually hitting an external endpoint, this is not directly in our application. This server is hosted somewhere, written by some other people, and we are interfacing with it using the fetch API. Now, for this instance, it would be best to use the plus page.js because of with the plus page.js, it only runs on the server on initial load to get the SEO benefits, and then subsequent navigation is done on the client. Now, what does that mean for us? It means that when we are navigating later on after initial load, it's not going to be going to our own server and then from our own server to their own server. So what's going to do is from the client to our own server, from our own server to their own server. That's what the server.js file will do. But for the plus page.js file, you're going to go from our own client directly to their server to get the data, and then from their server to our client, just straight away. But in the scenario where the server was living with this application, like we had endpoints directly created in this application. Now, I don't know if you know this, but with Sveltekit, you can actually create your backend. So if we created the backend for our application in this folder, it will make sense to use the plus page.server.js file, because in that case, the server is directly here and we can just go straight from our client to our server to get the data, and then from our server, bring it back to the client. But if it was on a different server somewhere and using this server load function, it's going to go from our client to our server to their own server and then back to our client. So is that unnecessary trip to our server? That doesn't make any sense. So using the plus page.js file or the load function, the universal load function, makes sense because it goes from the client to their own server and then from their own server to the our clients. What I'm going to do now is give you a list of when you might want to use the universal load function over the server load function. So when you are loading data from an external API, as in our case right here. So when you want to use memory data if it's available. So that example, take a look at that in some coming videos. So I'll show you how to do that. Another reason why you want to use the universal load function is if you want to delay navigation until an image has been preloaded to avoid pop-ins. So you can also use the plus page.js file in that kind of scenario. Makes perfect sense. And one other good reason is if you need to return something from the load function that can't be serialized. One other cool thing with loading data is that just as we can load data for our page file with plus page.js and plus page.server.js, we can also load data for our layout. with so it's crazy with the plus layouts.js or the plus layouts.server.js, and the children of that layout would inherit that data loaded, and you can get it at any time. You don't need to be passing props. You can use the page store. And I don't really want to go deep into that and show you all that, but if I'm building like huge projects, I usually use this. You can check some of those tutorials out I have on my other channel. But you can do some really crazy stuff that you don't really even need some crazy global state, none of that. We have the page store. You can get the data from the parent layout anytime, anywhere. It's absolutely crazy. So Sveltekit, I just don't know how to describe Sveltekit. It's it's a really cool framework, and it's really a shame that most people don't actually notice this about this, and they're busy making noise about some other framework that don't actually even do their job as well. So enough bumbling. Let's call it a day for this episode. It's been pretty long, a lot longer than I thought it would be. But for the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at how we can deal with headers and cookies. So make sure that you guys are tuned for that. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. If you have any question, the comment sections are always open. And remember, I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.